Welcome to Unlock Church. My name is Scott Mendenhall. Thank you so much for being here on a cold day. I am excited about the series we're in. We'll explain this in a little bit. You'll just have, if you can't see the TV, I'm so sorry if we ruined your viewing experience there. We're going to get to that. But we are in a series that is called Pioneers versus Settlers. And if you weren't here last week, let me catch you up really quick to the idea. Is that our hope is to push all of us into a pioneering mindset. If that's to start something new personally with your relationship with God, your relationships, where you work, and all of those things that come into mind when I say pioneering something new. In settling, we want to move you as a settler. If you go, I've settled in this area in my life or that, we want to move you to move out of being a settler to being a pioneer. And if you're a pioneer, you're like, well, can I ever settle then? Is that a thing? When we settle, that we should settle with the heart or the mind of a pioneer. That I want to settle so that I can help the other pioneers get after it, not circle the wagons and get my own thing for me. Because that's the danger, is that if we just settle and it's now all about me, we lose what Jesus has been trying to do in us and through us all of our lives. So my hopes today is to get us a little nudge moving forward, becoming a pioneer of new things in your life. Because after all, we're sitting in Minnesota today because at some point in our life, someone left Boston and became a pioneer to here, but we're also here because someone stayed and settled it. So you need both, but you don't need the settlers that are going to settle and just build their own ranch. Because if that happened in Minnesota, we wouldn't be here. You would just have one individual there. And so my host today is to tell a big story of our past that we might be able to learn from, right? We're in 2020, and as I've just been listening to different things and you're hearing a bunch of people talk about it, they're all this, I missed all the jokes early on in the year, like people talking about it's going to be a clearer year. I was like, what? It took me a second to figure that out. I was like, what are they talking about? Why is everybody saying that? I was like, oh, 2020, I get it. Yeah, that's good vision. I just totally looked over that. I was like, see, so did you. Now you get it. You can go and tell that one too. But I was hearing all these people talk about the 2020s and just preparing for the topic of today. And today I want to share what I've learned from other people. So if you go search 2020 topics and stuff, you might find samples of this today. I've tried to put it all together in here today and use it to hopefully do what it did for me, which just lit a fire in my heart to keep going for it. Like, we as Unlock Church, we might be a little church. We used to be a baby church. We've gotten to a little church, but we got a big heart. We want to change the city. This Thursday, we held our first planning meeting for camp this summer, and we are excited about it. Like, we know our first week theme. We've already just dreamt of how we're going to create the videos. We're so excited, and we're starting now because we want to continue to reach the Twin Cities. We've already had meetings with churches that are going to bring in 50 to 75 kids to come in, or teenagers to help lead these camps. I mean, we're excited about it. We don't look around going, we're going to wait till we get a certain size as a church to reach a generation, or we'll wait till we have all the money to do what we... No, we're going after what God called us to do, and may that be the best example that we got around here, that God's calling you out into some deep water where you can't touch, and that's because He wants you to trust Him in all things. Just like Unlock Church is doing. We don't understand how this summer is going to look and how it's all going to happen. I mean, we're just dreaming up these camps and we're going to create it. And it's like, okay, now we got heaps of other churches involved in this. And we need to raise resources for this. And we are going after what God's called us to do. We're trying to pioneer something different. We're not trying to go, well, you know what? We're just getting started as a church, so we'll wait till we get 10 years and get our own building, and then we'll start to do those things. No way. No way. We're doing what God called us to do right from the get-go, and that is to reach the next generation in unchurched people. That's us. You're sitting here today because that's what we've been running after for 4 years. So thank you. Thanks for being here and helping us fight for the good things and helping plan summer camps and calling people and asking for food and going, hey, would you give us free food? I don't know how that conversation, but man, thank you, because people have done that stuff, right? Like, we had free food at camp last year because someone called around and said, hey, we got this good thing happening. Would you like to be a part of it? And I got to always say thank you to you. I get it. And these stories that I get to go share about Unlock Church is not really because I'm doing it. I mean, it's you doing it, right? I'm doing it with you. And so thank you. Just, man, already we're excited what God did through Christmas. Christmas was so much fun for us. Dreaming about what God's going to do, pioneering for what God's going to do in the summer. And what young people God's going to touch. And so today, I want to use a story right from the get-go that you're all very familiar with. I'm sure you've heard it in some form or fashion. Even if you're not a follower of Jesus or grown up in the church, and you've heard a version of this, I'm sure. Some of you that have grown up in the church, the minute I give you the reference point, you're going to go, oh, I've heard this so many times. What could you possibly be saying today that's going to be different than I've heard from other pastors and stuff? I don't know. That's not my job. That's Jesus' job to talk to you. And so don't get disgruntled. Ask Jesus, what do you want me to hear from this story that I've heard a million times? I could probably tell it better than that guy up there. Ask yourself, what is Jesus saying to you, and what are you going to do about it today? Because he's going to. Even down to, I'm just going to getting to sit in the front row there, and right from the get-go, Jesus spoke to a couple about a dog today. It was just amazing. Joey said, if you're thinking about getting a dog, you should get a dog. And there's this couple that is on the fence about getting a dog. I was like, it sounds like Jesus spoke to you today in church. I'm just saying. It couldn't get more clear. Now, if they wrestle about that, about Jesus and that, that's on them, I guess. But get a dog. So here it is. It's Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. Jesus is about to wrap up the Sermon on the Mount. He didn't call it the Sermon on the Mount. We call it that, just so we know it's kind of reference to what it was. Jesus' big teaching. Jesus laid down so much stuff. If you don't know where to pick up your Bible, like Brian said, read your Bible, and I say all this good stuff, and you're like, what should I read? Google the Sermon on the Mount. It'll come up, okay? Trust me. You can Google Sermon on the Mount. It'll come up, and just read all the stuff that Jesus was saying. It was like if modern day, he said it and just dropped the mic, right? He's like, hey, now go to work, okay? Get after it. And so he wraps all of this up with this story. It's a made-up story to illustrate, I think, his point. And as I was thinking about it this week, something like just a tiny little light bulb, bling, went off when I was like, oh, all of a sudden I got an inside track on who Jesus' audience was at the time. And they call this Sermon on the Mount because a lot of historians believe that the teaching was done on the side of a hill. And a lot of historians have gone and found where they think this was, because he's speaking to thousands of people without any microphone system. He's just speaking to people, okay? And so they found this place, like you got the sea just down the slope of the hill, and they stood on the side of the hill, and they just began to have a conversation, and they measured how far away that people could listen to a man just speaking. In the way that the mountains are on the right, and the hill goes down into the sea, and just the way it's laying out in geography, someone could physically speak without yelling, and thousands of people could hear it. I just think that's tremendous. I'm like, yeah, wow, that's so cool. Now, I'm sure they knew of that in that time period, that was unique to that spot. It was probably a common spot where rabbis would come and speak. I'm sure this wasn't a first-time event. I'm assuming that many, many people knew of this area in that land, because wouldn't you know it, right? Have you ever gone to Washington, D.C.? I think it's the Capitol building. They take you into the tour, and they're like, oh, yeah, if you stand in this corner of this room and over there, we can talk normal, and you can hear it by the way the building is made. And it's tremendous. There's heaps of people in the middle, and you just get in the corner, and you can literally just talk normal. And because of the way the ceiling is, the person in the corner across from you can hear you. Just by the way. So obviously, it's a thing. It's not a miracle here. We're just talking about Jesus knew where to stand, and thousands of people heard. Jesus just laid down so many good things. So read the Sermon on the Mount. I'm going to wrap it up for you. And if you know the story, just pretend it's the first time you've ever heard it, and you're like, wow, that's good stuff. Okay, so here we go. Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. The rains came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because its foundation was on the rock. But everyone, so now he's going to contrast this, but everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rains came down, the streams rose, the wind blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowd were amazed at his teachings because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. So they noticed something very different in the style of Jesus' teaching. Remember, this is one of Jesus' first big teachings. They're like, wow, something different about this guy. And he uses stories to illustrate. And he says, okay, there's two groups of people. There's two groups of people in this room. There's a group that hears his words and apply them and go, I'm going to do something about them. There's a group in here that answers this question when I say, what is Jesus saying to you and what are you going to do about it? You do something about it. There's also a group in here, and I'm not pointing you out. I'm not saying it's you. This is between you and Jesus. If it's like, you're like, oh yeah, it's me. That's Jesus talking to you, okay? But there's a group in here that hears things in podcasts and teachings on Sunday services and worship and videos, and you hear things like, that's really good. My mom needs to hear that. My coworker needs to hear that. But you don't do anything about it actually for yourself. That's the other group that Jesus is talking about. And when Jesus tells the story, it's the same storm. It's the same house built. He didn't differentiate the two houses. He just said these houses are built, identical houses built, but the foundation is what is different. So our foundation, obviously, if you're an adult, you get it, matters. It matters the way, if you have kids, the way when you think about it, you're just trying to beat into, well, at least I sometimes feel this way, beat into my children a great foundation so that when they become teenagers and I'm not around them to tell them that's a dumb idea, there's something that goes off in their head goes, this is a dumb idea, I shouldn't do it. I'm trying to get to that spot, okay? I'm just trying to build a foundation in my children's brains so that's the thing. Like I'm struggling on some things, like with all this snow, my daughter, Icon, she calls herself a winter baby, but because she's born in winter, but she thinks she's like immune to snow and cold. Like the other day, it's like, Icon, will you take out the garbage? And she goes to the door and she can't get it open. Why? Because it's frozen shut. Because it's that cold. Okay, it was like negative something outside. It was frozen shut, and you would think that's an alarm to someone. Oh yeah, I should probably put shoes on and not go out barefoot in the snow. Oh no, she just woof, got the door open, grabs the garbage, and just marches out into the snow. And she's out there, she's got no coat on, she has no shoes on, no socks. She actually took her socks off on the deck when she got out there. I was just watching this going, what is happening here? Why are we doing this? Like you're going to go outside in the cold to take off your socks. Okay. Do that anyway, she goes outside. The garbage can lids are frozen closed, so she's messing around. She's out there for 5 minutes. Okay, barefoot, no coat, and she's just laughing and loving life. She comes in, I go, you cold? She's like, yeah, I can't feel my feet. I'm like, do you think? I'm like, seriously, was there nothing in your head like triggering you? I should come back inside. I don't know. Like, I just don't know. I can't get it to her that, hey, snow's cold. Put shoes on. Like I've said it so many times, it's like, I give up. If your little baby toe turns black and falls off, I told you so, right? It's like, what else are you going to do? She's like, I don't get it. I was just like, it's so cold. So like I'm telling you, I just want them to make good decisions, and I'm not there yet. I got a lot of work to do as a dad. But you have where Jesus is trying to prove a point about the foundation, and the foundation is built before the house is built. And sometimes we start building on a non-ready foundation in our lives. Maybe some of you that are single, you shouldn't be dating because your foundation is all messed up, and you should fix your foundation so your dating life won't be so messy. I don't know. Maybe that's a thing for you. It's working on our foundation. Some of us were adults and we're like, yeah, it's embarrassing. I've actually had to hide what my foundation looks like because it's a train wreck and I've not really taken time to go back and fix it. I just kind of hide it. And so but maybe today we can go backwards and fix some of our foundations. Go back and make it better than it is. And maybe today we can actually go back 100 years and learn what in the 1920s they did to prepare for the 30s. Because after all, what comes after 20? 30, right? Thank you for being with me and catching not 21. Thank you. I thought for sure someone would say 21, but you're tracking. You're smart and alive today. You had coffee. Thank you. And so 30, right? So what you do in your 20s, you will pay for or live out in your 30s. And in the United States in 1920s, set up for something drastically different in the 30s. We're going to learn. Maybe you know it, especially being from Minnesota, you'll know it. Maybe some of you, this will be the first time you've ever heard it. But I want to pose this question before we get into it. What is it you're building your life on? What is it you're building your relationships on? What are they surrounded around? And it's going to be different for all of us. But this is something, especially third week into the new year, we should be answering this question. What is it? What am I building my life on? Is it how big my bank account is, what car I'm going to drive, where I will live, what job I have? If those are the things we build our life on, we're in big trouble because all of those things can change in a moment. So what is it that we should build our lives on? We're going to go back really quick before we jump into the 1920s in Deuteronomy, which is in the Old Testament. It's the Jewish scriptures. Deuteronomy chapter 30, it says this: I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him and keep his commands, decrees, and laws. And then you will live in increase, and the Lord your God will bless you. I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. You have options. This is telling you, you and I have options today. What are you building your life on? You have options. It can be things that produce life. It can also be things that destroy life. And sometimes the things that destroy our lives, we actually don't see it for a decade. But as we roll into the 20s, it's going to set up the way you roll into your 30s. It's just true. It's a fresh decade. It's a huge start. And so we're going to use the past to hopefully fix our future. Some guy, Santayana, he's quoted for saying this: those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Those that cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. There's heaps of people I talk to, they're like, I don't like dealing with the past. I don't like thinking about backwards. But the problem is, then you're going to have to pay the price that somebody else has paid. See, I always talk about myself for my kids is I want my ceiling to be their floor. As a church, why do we want Unlock Church to grow? And why do we want to reach people and stuff? Why do we want to be excellent in what we do as a church, as a community? Because we want our ceiling to be really high, so when we hand this off to the next generation, we paid the price for them already. And that we hand it off with a high ceiling so that they get a great big start. That's wisdom. That's being great with what you've been given. And so why would you want to be great as an individual, as a mom or dad? Why do you want to be great? Is because that gives a permission to someone watching you like your children to do the same. That as they watch your ceiling increase, you're going to hand off sometime, at some point, you're going to hand it all off to them. May they have seen the best example of going after it and learn from your past. Parents, if you have a past that is not exciting to share with your kids, and you're like, oh, if I share it with them, what will they think? Man, would you share that past with them in the appropriate time and manner so they don't have to repeat what you have walked through? I mean, it's a simple thing. Like, growing up, my parents, they built a house out in the middle of nowhere, and they didn't finish the basement, but that's where the kids had to shower. And my parents didn't put covers on, my dad, I should say, didn't, you know how it is, you get projects and you don't finish it all off and you don't put the cover on the light switch, right? You just like, I'll get to it at some point. I remember distinctly showering, coming out of the shower, barefoot. I probably had just a towel on and probably a little wet from not drying off very well because I was a little guy. And I remember going to shut off the light switch, but my finger went inside the light switch, and I hit the, you got it already, right? I hit the power, right? I hit the cables that were in there. It's just like, man, did it hurt? Like in the ground, like made it hurt worse because I was on concrete and I was wet. Like I distinctly remember feeling the little droplets of water stinging me more than anywhere else. It was just an experience, right? But what did I learn from that? Put the covers back on the light switches when you take them off. That's what I learned. I learned from my past. I'm going to teach that to my children. Hey, if you take a light switch cover off, put it back on, okay? No one wants to light up their life that way, okay? Just do that, okay? My dad didn't. I want to pass that on. What you have experienced in your life good, bad, or in between, pass that on to the generation behind, because those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. When we spend time in our past and deal with some of the mess stuff in there, reminds us, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to do a version of that when I'm 40. I don't want to do a version of that when I'm 50. I just don't. I've learned it. I don't. So we spend time in the past so that we can learn from it and move forward into the future. And today you have choices what you're going to build your life on. So 100 years ago, in 1920s, the United States of America was preparing for the Dust Bowl. Anybody ever heard of this, the Dust Bowl? A few. You paid attention in history. I asked Lily and Joey in the office this week. I think Kristen might have been there as well. And I think Joey said, "Is that a college bowl game on New Year's?" He didn't. Joey, he didn't actually say that. You just believed that he would say that. Oh, I love having the mic. Okay, so here's how it happened. Here's how it happened. The Dust Bowl was 100% preventable. It was made and developed by humans. The Dust Bowl was. Like, okay, so we should learn some things. So what happened? Okay, give you a lot of facts about history. Some you will not care about. We're going to get to those, but let me describe these storms to you. These storms, at their worst, were 2,000 feet high and over 200 miles wide. The dust, when they would come flying in, would remove the paint off the cars. You get caught outside, you know what happens? You go blind because the dust particles go through your eyelids. That's how fast it's coming at you. We're talking about 200-mile-an-hour winds. They're not tornadoes. It's the Great Plains doing what they do in the summertime. They're just windy. Blowing dust, making people go blind. At night, families would to protect their home, they would put wet towels around the windowsill to try to catch the dust that would come in through the cracks of everything. They would fill the house with dust in the morning. Students, to go to school in the morning, they would get wet towels and they would put it on their face. That was their morning. That was what the 30s looks like. When somebody goes, your 30s, 1930s, what did it look like? And they would say, that's what I did for 8 years. Because these storms lasted for 8 solid years. Does that look like what we want to prepare for? During these storms, quite often people would get dust pneumonia, meaning your lungs filled with dust, and that's how you passed away. One big storm recorded 7,000 people dying from dust pneumonia. The winds would blow afterwards, even if the storm's not coming through. And then you would have like snow drifts that we had. They're beautiful. Now imagine that with dust. Can we go to the next picture here? Look at that. That's a house with just dust over it. That's these storms we're talking about in the 1920s. They prepared for in the 30s. When these storms would come through and the wind would make these drifts, the cattle then would walk out of the pens and now would be free to roam. They couldn't keep any of their cattle around because they could just get out and take off. The cattle then, because they would be wandering around and they're breathing it in, you know what would happen with the cattle? Is that their noses would get plugged with the dust and they would suffocate. The Dust Bowl. Wild animals were being just decimated. The wolf population just wiped out. Coyotes wiped out. Any major predator of that day wiped out because they had nowhere to go to hide from these storms except for the jackrabbits. Jackrabbits live in the ground. And so they would just hunker down during the storm. And so if the dust storms didn't get your town, you know what would? The jackrabbits. Did you know jackrabbits are rodents? Rodents, a qualification of a rodent, you're going to learn a lot today, a lot about Bible stuff, and then the Dust Bowl, and rabbits and rodents. Don't say you didn't learn anything today. Rodents have to chew. They got to gnaw to keep the front teeth down. Rabbits are in that family, and so they just gnaw on things. They don't care what it is. It's just got to get their teeth to stay from growing out their face. And so they just gnaw on things. The largest amount, I guess you call it a herd. I don't know what you call a bunch of jackrabbits together, but the largest herd of jackrabbits was 35,000 jackrabbits roamed the Great Plains together. And they would come into a city and they would decimate it. They would, if your house was still standing, they would gnaw your house down. The Dust Bowl takes place from Minnesota, North and South Dakota, all the way down. You just draw a line really from Minnesota straight down to Iowa, Kansas, all the way down to Texas, all the way over to California. That's where the Dust Bowl took place. Now you'd think, well, that's just an isolated problem. How is this a United States problem? Because when these storms would switch directions, east or west, there was one storm that traveled so far that it went through New York City and wiped out New York City's, a lot of the places, shut down New York City for hours one afternoon, for 5 hours. New York City was at a standstill because of a dust storm. One of those dust storms continued to travel for over 250 miles out into the ocean. Boats were having to shovel the decks of their boat like you would shovel snow. And they were 250 miles out into the ocean. These storms just destroyed and decimated people's lives. Wheat was a thing. Wheat was what people were making their money from at the day. And they plant all this wheat, and they had heaps of money, and all of a sudden, well, you know what? You know what created the Dust Bowl? Something that people didn't plan for in the 30s was a drought. The largest drought to ever hit the United States was in 1930. I think there's only like a couple cities in the United States that did not record negative in water. Everybody else. I mean, it's a crazy map. I should have got it. Like Minnesota, one of the driest ever. Minnesota actually was it was a map that used color, and red was like bad. Minnesota was the reddest in the 30s. But you know what? You know what doesn't do well in drought? Wheat. Now, how did we get here? How did this happen in the 30s? Because in the 1920s, World War I is ending, and there was this Homestead Act that was revised from the Civil War. After the Civil War, the president wanted people to move out and possess new land. And so if you didn't take arms up against the government would allow you to move out into nowhere's land, be a pioneer, get a plot of land, like 100 and some acres, that you would do something with it. You would farm it. And so after the Civil War, people and families started going west and making homes out there. And they began to move out there, and they would have their own little farms, their personal farms, and that happened for a while. Then World War happened, and after World War I, the president at the time said, let's revisit the Homestead Act. We need more people to go out into the West. It's still not populated enough, but they've got to agree to do farming out there. And so more people after World War I began to move out into the West and began to look around and go, what's here in the plains? All this prairie grass is everywhere. We can't do anything with this. At the same time, it's like a perfect storm in this deal. At the exact same time, people are moving out, and the wheat epidemic happens where people want wheat to make everything. So farmers are switching over to the wheat, and now all of a sudden, instead of having personal farms, John Deere developed a tractor, and because people had made heaps of money selling wheat, they had the money to buy the tractors. And so all of these mom and dads that had little farms, now all of a sudden we're going to go, I'm getting a big farm. I want a big farm because it's more money. More wheat means more money. Let's do it. We'll buy John Deere's tractor. They're just dropping down here. Let's go till up the prairie grass because it's good for nothing, and let's just plant wheat everywhere. And began to plant wheat. They just began to plant. I think we have a few more pictures of those. I'm not sure if I remember correctly. Is there any more pictures, Jacob? There's not. He's shaking. Great job of getting those. Thank you for doing that. It really, hopefully you see it, right? You're like, wow, the Dust Bowl. Yeah, he does. Jacob works hard back there. You have all these people just after money. Money's not a bad thing. But there was no thought of, we shouldn't do this. You know what? Here's the thing that when I look at it. That we can often do things that we think we can do without thinking, should we? There's a lot of things you can do, but should you? So they till it all up. The drought happens of the 30s. People making tons of money, and life is so good, and the drought comes. The wheat doesn't withstand the drought. The roots are too small in wheat. And so when they die, the roots die and the winds come, which is natural in the plains. It's natural. It happens. It's just windy. There's nothing really to slow it down. And there's nothing to hold the dirt down. Do you know what does hold the dirt down? Prairie grass. You know the thing about prairie grass is you look at it and it's just like grass. But you know the thing that's just unique about prairie grass is the roots go down almost 5 feet. You can't see it. But if you genuinely have real prairie grass, you can't just pull it up and get the roots. You'll get some of the roots, but they go down sometimes at 5 feet. When prairie grass looks dead on the top, you know what's not dead? Is the roots. Because the roots just kind of go into a hibernation mode. Hey, we got to preserve life here. We're going to hunker down. We're going to hold the dirt down. And so when these storms come through, or not even storms, just the high winds come, the dirt doesn't move because it's held down. This time period is still labeled the worst environmental disaster ever in the United States caused by humans. And it 100% was preventable. See, we spend our 20s getting ready for our 30s, and whatever your 30s looks like, whatever that decade's going to look like, you're getting ready for it now. And the storms that are going to happen that you can't see, the high winds that will happen, will all determine where your roots are and where your foundation is, will depend on how you take advantage of the wind. I was reading a quote again this week that will make sense here in a second, but I want to read you the quote. Never take down a fence until you learn why it was up in the first place. And I read that, and I kept reading, and I was like, is that really, like, what are they trying to say there? Don't take down a fence until you figure out why it was there. It's this, and I tried to say it a second ago. We live in a day when it is possible to do things we can do without the thoughts of should we do them. We live in a day when it's possible to do things that we can just do it. I can get on my phone and search anything. No one's going to tell me I can't do that. I can go into debt. No one's telling me not to. Actually, people are trying to push me to go into debt. Banks will give me more money than I can actually afford. It's like, what? When I bought my house, I was like, you approved me for that? What are you thinking? Like, I didn't sit there and go, wow, great. I'm like, are you serious? Like, what are you trying to do? Ruin my life? Like, no way. There's no one that I then negotiate back with the bank, go, no, I just want this much. Like, don't you want to remodel your house? I will over time. I must have been very unique to them for me to say no to it. No, I want less. They're like, yeah, you're weird, man. Okay, good luck with what you're doing in life. But, I mean, we're just always pushed in to get more. And if we're not careful, it doesn't mean we should. See, sometimes when I'm talking about never take down a fence until you learn why it was put up in the first place, sometimes the Bible we're talking to you about reading, the Bible sometimes can feel like a fence. You hear me talk on Sundays, and you hear maybe your favorite guy talk on a podcast or a lady talk on a podcast, and you're like, I hear him talk all the time, but that just feels like they're trying to control me. Why would Jesus say that? That feels like a fence, a border. Why? Oh, I don't have to do that. That's so for like Jesus' time period, not my time period. Let's get with it. That's not what culture says. And so we all of a sudden start looking at some of these Jesus principles in our lives, and we just look at it like it's a choice. Oh, it's just so controlling. And then all of a sudden we step over the fence without asking the question, why was that there anyways? If something about the Bible rubs you wrong, or it rubs you in a way like that's not how I think, instead of saying that's not for me, you should probably study that topic for yourself and find out what Jesus is saying to you, because I promise you this, those things that feel like fences are to keep you safe. They're boundaries from running into the street. Why? The invisible fence for your dogs. Why do people do that? Why? Because they don't want their dog to run in the street and get hit. It's for their safety. It's not to limit their life. It's for their safety. A lot of things that Jesus asks us to do and not to do is not to control you. He's not a dictator. You have free will and free choice. But it's to prevent pain. It's to prevent you from having dirty 30s. Really, that's what it is. It's like, so you don't have to walk into your 30s going, oh, I'm filled with so much regret and remorse. And now some of you are sitting and go, that's great, Scott, but I didn't hear this before I have a background and a past. We'll get to that in a second. But don't tear down those fences that you hear about Jesus just because they don't make sense to you. Find out why Jesus said those. I wrote it like this just so I get the point across. Being a follower of Jesus at times feels like there are borders or fences in our lives. And there are many times we will read or hear parts of what Jesus says to do, and we don't do it. And when we begin to ask ourselves, why is that fence there or that border in the Bible? Culture, we would answer it with, culture has changed. It's not like that anymore. My friends tell me to do this. So we begin to take down the fences that Jesus put in place, just like the homesteaders tore up the grass without wondering why would these roots be so deep? Because they just wanted the money. And then I know I'm jumping to conclusions for a lot of these people, right? They're not here to defend themselves. I'm just looking backwards, using present-day circumstances to judge past, okay? That's dangerous. I am aware of that. I'm not judging individual, but somehow they got there. I mean, we're talking about millions of miles of land tilled up. Thank you, John Deere. Because that was impossible without the development of the tractor at the time. And John Deere's not a culprit of it. It's just human nature. If we learn anything from this story, it's human nature. When given an opportunity to tear down something for our benefit without thinking about should I, we are tempted to just do it and pay the price later. Ever said it's easier to ask forgiveness than it is permission? Is that not dangerous? It's this. Now, hear this very, very, especially young people, the middle school or high schools, hear this. Now yells louder, but later lasts longer. Now yells louder, but later lasts longer. And we are in a generation where we get things immediately. I mean, thank you, Amazon, for 2-hour delivery. I love that thing, right? Hey, what are we having for dinner, Holly? And she'll go, I don't know, we're missing a few things. I'm like, let's Amazon that. Like, get that here. Let's do it, okay? It's amazing, but it also ruins you because all of a sudden it's now. I just want it now. I don't care what I have to pay for it in the future. I want it now. Just some scary facts for you. What the ability of our phones we can do is we can Google some amazing things. We can also Google some really horrible things that would destroy your life and your marriage. 1 out of 4, okay? 1 out of 4. So get in a line with 4 people, okay? That's exactly how this works. And one of them is this. 1 out of 4 Google search is for pornography. 1 out of 4. That's a computer, right? A computer's saying this is it, okay? This is Google has to look at their algorithm and go, 1 out of 4 searches is for pornography. In a given day, the data transmitted daily for pornography is greater than Amazon, Netflix, and Twitter combined. You don't think the nation has a problem with this? And this stuff just destroys marriages and destroys, before that, it destroys an individual. We're all smart enough, and if you were here for a series we did months ago, you know that sex isn't just skin on skin, that it's a spiritual thing. It changes the format, the way you think. If you are looking at pornography, it changes the way you view those things. It will ruin you. Now, here's the problem, is that those that are struggling with this, because it's an addiction, it's an embarrassing thing for people to raise their hand and say, I need help. But would you please get help? For yourself and for your future spouse, get help. If you're married, man, get help. To me, when I see somebody on their knees, it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. When somebody raises their hand and says, I need help, when someone wants to meet with me and says, I need help, I never view that as weakness. I view that as the strength that Jesus is asking people to step into when he calls us out and says, I want to help you with that thing. He wants to help you. He does not want to condemn you. Jesus says, I did not come to condemn anyone. I came to set you free. My grace, he is the Messiah, but he is also the Lord. He says, I'll forgive you, but stop it. He's both. It's not one or the other. Think about that with your children on their devices. Mom and dad, please, if they have iPads and my kids have iPads, do something where you make it hard for that to pop up, because the pornography business is linking ads to apps, kids' apps, because they know if they get them at a young age, they have them for life, and they'll make millions of dollars off of them. It breaks my heart, but it's just the truth. There is people out there working to get your kids at a small age, at age 5. They figure if they introduce a picture that is inappropriate of an individual to a 5-year-old, they have them for their life. We as parents have got to wise up and make sure that when our kids are on their devices, they cannot, or they have to work really hard to get to it. I'm speaking from, because I don't want, when I'm thinking about the next generation or the next decade for all of us, I'm thinking about that for our kids. I want the next decade for them to be great. And as a parent, I have to set them up sometimes for that greatness. I've got to do the work to go, yeah, you guys can be on your iPads, but only in front of me. That's the rule in the house. They can't take them into their bedroom. They can't take them and hide somewhere. They've got to be in the kitchen, sitting next to each other. Or in the living room if we're in there. They can't be somewhere else, and then they have a very small amount of time. And the biggest thing that I've learned with my kids is the only way they can have their iPads is they run 4 miles a day. That's the rule in our house. If you ever come by my house and you see my kids running, it's because they have to run miles. You earn minutes by miles. So that it's not, and I'm not telling you to do that. That's what works for us. But do something. Set the foundation up for your kids right. Well, I'm on the topic, parents. Oh, man, the youth pastor is going to come out here, okay? So I'm not going to get up in your business, but I am, okay? Maybe I'm not, but I don't know. Don't take it wrong, but hear my heart, okay? My fear as a pastor, former youth pastor, my fear is that when we get to the 30s, we're going to have a generation of young people that do not value the community of the church. Because we have a generation of adults that do not value the community of the church, and I'm not pointing my fingers at you. Okay? Please don't take that personal going, oh yeah, great, you're saying that about, I'm not. This isn't about perfect attendance. It's not about that. Remember I said value. I didn't say that you show up every week, but the value of it. There's more people today outside the church than there is inside the church. And we're going to have a problem in the 30s when we have a generation that doesn't want to go to the church. And you know why? We've already started seeing a problem, the epidemic where people jump to soothe their problem with substance abuse and spending more money than they can afford and things of that nature. Why that is? Because this is the first generation, the millennials is the first generation where it's the church. It's post-church. Where their parents didn't value the church, and so therefore this generation does not value the church, and when they need help, their first option to run to the church isn't there, because they weren't brought up that way. They were brought up when church was convenient, we go. When when something more important happens, we're going to go do that, and then we'll get to church on the highlights and all this. Mom and dad, when you go home, when you speak of church, may you speak it of a way you love the community. Because that's what we want. Church, in my mind, is a group of people. It is not the name Unlocked Church. That's just the name that we got. We are a community of people coming together that wants to see needs and meet needs in each other's lives. That's the foundation, how Jesus set it up in the get-go. May we communicate that to the next generation, that when they have problems, may they see you in your problems, you go to Jesus with them and not something else. Would you stand in the gap for the next generation so that we have a room full of high schoolers and middle schoolers in the 30s because we kept our kids in the church? If you're struggling to get up on a Sunday morning and you're like, I don't know if I want to go to church today, may it pop in your brain, your children, and go, I need them to get there today, because whatever Lily's going to teach them today or in babies today, they need to hear. I need to tuck that away in their heart. They need to value church. They got to get there as much as they can, because when they hit rock bottom or rough moments, you want them to know to run to the community of people that will point them to Jesus. Okay, that's what help me on that, okay? I'm not telling you you're not doing it. And here's the deal. Jesus is sharing this thought on the builders. You know who he's speaking to? If you go back into the Sermon on the Mount here, Jesus is talking to people that know it already. You know how I know that? Is because if you go back in a little bit, he says to the hearers of it, he goes, you've once heard it said. He says this repeatedly. But just the one that pops around, he said, you heard it once said that if you... No, now I can't quote it right, but I'm going to try my best, okay? But he talks about you once heard that adultery is bad, but here I say that to look at a woman lustfully is adultery. You once heard it said that adultery is wrong, not good. He says that's what you've heard. But I'm here today to up the ante and say if you look at a person in the opposite sex with lust in your eye, you've already committed adultery. He's just trying to say, hey, I'm here to raise the stakes. And he's talking to people that know the stakes. They know it. Just like today, I'm talking to a lot of you. You're like, I get it. I know what you're saying. But what group do you sit in? Are you hearing it and not doing anything about it? Are you hearing it and doing something about it? Maybe the iPad thing for parents, you heard it. Now, what are you going to do about it? Maybe the dating thing, you got to fix your foundation. What are you going to do about it? That's Jesus going tap, tap, tap. It's time to do something about it. Doing it is way different than hearing it. My best example as we wrap this thing up is what we got over here. What I'm talking about is your choice today to every area in your life. Every area. Don't be the person that goes, Jesus, you can have my time, I'll volunteer. And that's great. But Jesus, you don't get how I treat people. I don't like that group of people. I'm not going to change to I think they're just users, and so I can't love them. You're not hearing what Jesus has to say on that topic then. Or the best example is that we create these foundations in life. And we come along and we're like, okay, some areas in my life I might give to Christ, but maybe none of them at all. And we build our life, this weight, it's 5 pounds. We build our life on this. This is what represents what we're going after, our dreams and hopes. And they're just your dreams and hope. They're not through the filter of what Jesus has to say on it. And we just come along and we're like, okay. And then the storms of life hit and we're like, okay, I didn't see that financial thing, health problems going on. And then we put it on there and it can't hold it. It just rips through because the foundation isn't very good. Or maybe you've chosen, you know what, I'm going to do. I hear that pastor guy talking about that. I'm going to try to build some of my marriage on it, but you know what? I want me time. I want this, so we're going to share this, and we're not going to fully be one together. We're going to split our bank accounts. We're just going to be a couple that lives in a house, but we do our separate lives. We're not going to look at what does Jesus say about a healthy marriage. We're not going to look at what does Jesus talk about finances. And I know that's a hot topic in church, but what does Jesus have to say? We're not going to do that. I'm going to build it on what I think is wise. And so then when the storms come in life again, we hang it on there and it just falls because there's nothing, there's no foundation. But Jesus' point here is that in life, if we choose to build a foundation, I might need to stand on this here. Good thing I worked out this week. Oh my gosh. I need like Bill here today or something. What we need is a stud, right? As you can tell. I'm not winded at all. Here's the deal. If we build our foundation on a stud, something that doesn't move, we can then put a lot of weight on there. And the storms of life come, and it doesn't fall apart. But what's your foundation in? There's a big difference in hearing. This group out here, this is just hearing. and not doing. This is doing. Now, to really make the illustration is, I'm going to try to do something. If that falls off, just go with it, okay? Oh my gosh, this is so heavy. Abijah, we should have put wheels on it. Not to be cheesy, we put it in the shape of a cross, because that's what matters. What matters in our life most is starting with the question, what does Jesus have to say about it? Whatever the decision is in your life. All the way down to what school your child needs to be in, to what promotion you should say yes to and no to. It all matters. It all matters. And Jesus does have an opinion on it. Because he loves you, and he wants the best things for you. He doesn't want you to have a train wreck life. He doesn't want you to crash and burn. He doesn't want you to experience hurt. But here's the best for those that are sitting and going, okay, I'm feeling pretty like, that's great, but my foundation is jacked up. Well, there's good news for the oppressed. There's a good news for those that have that background as I wrap this thing up. In Isaiah chapter 61, verse 3, to all who mourn, he will give a crown of beauty for ashes, a joyous blessing instead of mourning, festive praise instead of despair. In their righteousness, they will be like great oaks that the Lord has planted for his own glory. He'll trade in the bad for the good when you make the decision to get grounded into the foundation, into the cross, who Jesus is. He'll replace the junk for great things. That's what this is about. Be a pioneer that always keeps Christ in the foundation. And if this is an elementary thought today, may it be a reminder of what your foundation is, and maybe some of the areas in your life that I haven't mentioned that you know are not founded in Christ. Go there and put them in the foundation of Christ. And he might tell you to stop doing some things and start doing other things. And that's the power of Jesus. And that's being a follower of Jesus, is hearing and doing something about it. You know, I found very unique about this verse is that in their righteousness, they will be like great oaks that the Lord has planted for his glory. You know how they ended the drought, or not the drought, but they ended the Dust Bowl? There was nothing in this area. The president at the time came up with an idea that, hey, we need to plant trees. We need to plant 200 million trees, actually. And so they began a campaign in I think it's 1938, they began this campaign of planting 200 million trees from Canada to Texas, 100 miles wide. And they thought, this is going to stop the winds coming through, and we hope that the trees will give off condensation, which will bring rain. That and Mother Nature stopped doing what they were doing. The Dust Bowl comes to an end, and then they start a new decade, the 40s. Guys, my hope is today, and I'm sorry I spent a little bit of time on it, but I just wanted to drive this home on you. Set yourself up for great things in the future. Ask Jesus, what does he have to say on every topic? Mom and dad, raising your children, will you ask every time before you say, yes, you can do that? Would you ask yourself in your heart, Jesus, what do you want me to say at this moment? Should they play that sport this year? Should they take a season off? Should they be involved in that play? Should they dance? Should they not? Should they do all of it at the same time? Here's the deal. I don't have that answer. That is not for me to decide. It is not. I have no business deciding that for you. That's between you and Jesus and how he wants you to raise your children. But please, do yourself a favor. Ask the question, Jesus, what do you want me to do in every given decision? Buying a car, not buying a car. Give something away, whatever it is, ask. And I promise you, it'll set you up for great things in the future, and you'll become the pioneer that you want to be. Would you close your eyes? Jesus, I thank you for everybody that's here today hearing this, and those who are watching online. I ask that today we would move everything into the foundation of you this year. I thank you that I came across this teaching this week and changed just the way I see things. I hope I delivered it in a way that would do the same that you did in my life. You've totally made me think differently. May this decade, may we live it in a way that we read great things in the 30s, that it sets us up for great things in the future and the great things for the next generation. May this light a fire underneath us to get after it, Jesus. No matter our age or our backgrounds or our foundation, may we get after it today. Jesus, I love you. I thank you for how great you are. I thank you for all of us that have those backgrounds that we wish we could erase those moments, that you trade in the bad stuff for great things when we ask forgiveness and we genuinely mean it. That you're there, right there to say, I forgive you, and remind us to not do it again. May we love that about you, and we're looking at areas in our lives where what's that border there for, that fence that seems controlling? May we not tear it down with finding out why you asked us not to do that or to do that. Jesus, would you do a great work in our hearts this week? May this set us up for a great week where we're pointing people to you. Jesus, I love you. And as the Packer fans set up tonight for a great game, I ask that you be with them when the 49ers win. Jesus, we love you. In your name, amen.